Now the reason that we're starting with achromatic painting is because value relationships are the most important visual element relationships in any painting. Even if it is a painting that only uses like pure color, every color of the rainbow, even if it's non-objective, if it's highly abstracted, and or naturalistic, realistic, or photorealistic, Trompe l'oeil, the value relationship is the most important set of relationships. And value is the dominant and most important element in painting, whether or not it's an achromatic painting or a monochromatic painting or a fully chromatic painting. So these are in general the steps that we're going to use in every painting that we make. I'm going to post an image of this. This is a simple lesson in value relationships. So you can see here, this is the first step, and like I mentioned in the previous video, this is proportion. Oh, sorry, excuse me, shape, line, and proportion. Right? So making sure that everything is structurally sound. You can see, hopefully you can, I'll hold it closer so you can see, the termination line, which is the edge between light and dark, is defined here, even if it's not filled in. The location of that termination line, that the moment that the values really change significantly from light to dark or dark to light, is incredibly important. Incredibly important. Even more important than how soft or hard that edge will be in the painting, the location of that edge, that line, is important. Okay, and then it's mimicking what we did in our preliminary sketch. The next stage is assigning major values. So assigning major values to these shapes. And so this has nothing to do with detail. It has nothing to do with any stripes or striations on this, like apple, or this apple, or it has nothing to do with the decorative print that's on this jug, because look, it actually does have, has a like a dark rim and dark lines and all kinds of things. None of that is important at this stage. Imagine every object is solid. Every object is solid and plain, okay? And so you're just defining major values. Notice how, they're really just like two values, if maybe three at most. A light, a dark, and a much darker, right? And you're blocking those in. Now that's a word, the block in is a carefully chosen word that I'm using. All of your paintings are going to be kind of have harder edges between your values, these defined value shapes, before you adjust transitions. Now, okay, the next stage is going to be here. This is step 3, where you actually take this information that's kind of block in, establishing the location and proportion and the range of values, and then you begin to adjust the edges between the values. So, this one might stay a little bit harder. A highlight might stay a little bit harder. This one, because it's a rounded object, then it becomes softer. You first, though, have to establish the shape of the values, okay? Don't jump to this, okay? Don't skip this step. That's my biggest word of advice. If you skip this step and you just start applying the values and then start blending them right away, you're going to end up with something that looks cartoony and stylized and generalized, okay? You're not going to be happy with that. And only in the last stage would you add surface pattern, surface texture, and that sort of thing. And hopefully in this demo, we'll eventually get to that. So I'm going to keep this right here just as reference, okay? And the object that I'm going to be using is going to be this little oil can. Now I know that the lighting is not perfect on this camera. Okay, let's see. So I've already mixed. You remember all those different values, right? I wish I could get this a little bit closer. Okay, I've already mixed all those values. I've put some paint thinner or solvent into my container. We're going to work with a medium-sized brush. Okay, and by medium size, I mean something like this, okay? So you can see how maybe it's like the size of my thumb, okay? At least this big. Don't work with something teeny, okay? you're going to make a lot more brush strokes than you really need to. So remember, anytime that we're mixing paint, we use a clean palette knife. We also need to use a clean brush. So the first thing that I'm going to do is actually get a little bit of my solvent, which is also a paint thinner, and I'm going to put a little bit of that on my palette. I'm going to take my middle tone. I'm just going to dip my brush a little bit into the middle tone, okay, and mix it in with some of this paint thinner. So you can mix your solvent or use your solvent as a paint thinner. It mixes a little bit with the oil paint and creates this little suspension. Okay, so it's really kind of thin. What we're going to do is first just apply this thinned paint to the surface. Mostly we're just taking away that really unnerving white blank canvas. Okay, you can scrub it on there. It doesn't have to be perfect. So then the next thing you're going to do is just take a rag and you're going to wipe away the excess. Okay, so it just added a little bit of a tone. What this does is it puts the painting already into the language of value relationships. In other words, if we were to put a mark of paint on this canvas when it was perfectly white, then every single thing that you put on there would seem way too dark, right, by contrast. If we put a little bit of a tone on here, then we're actually going to be able to sense, you know, a little bit more relative darkness or relative lightness. Okay, so this takes away the edge, makes it less intimidating as a surface. It's not blank anymore, but also it begins the conversation of value relationships. Okay, so the next step, let's see, I'm going to take that same middle tone. This time I'm not going to use any turpentine. I'm not going to use any thinner. I'm just going to get a little bit of this. Okay, notice how I'm holding the brush almost like you would hold a stick of charcoal or a drawing pencil, not like this, back here, okay, and just kind of like use as few fingers or as few touch points as possible. Okay, so my next thing is going to be, let's see, I need to, pardon me really quickly, y'all. I need to grab that reference drawing that I made, okay? My apologies, okay? So remember these, okay? So now as I'm starting to work, I have the actual object that I'm observing. I have the sketch that I did, and I have this new surface. So the sketch is going to help me just with proportion and the composition. You know, I've already established that. I've already figured out where things need to go. I don't need to reinvent the wheel in order to do that. So I'm looking at like where the edge of the picture plane is and then where the edges of the object are. Again, it doesn't need to be thinned out too much. It's a little closer to this edge than this edge. About 3/4 of the way up. Okay. Straight line construction is wonderfully suited for this. It's a little bit closer here and here. Now notice that I did the thing. Again, these squares are almost the same. To make sure I bring that up. So don't be, don't be very thick with this little painted sketch, but also don't be too timid either. Okay, this is way too big. Now see, if I had this goes down a little bit more, okay? And then this little spout goes up about like this. This goes kind of like that. The edge goes here. All right. So just general information here. Okay. Okay, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. I'm just getting some general bearings. So that goes down that way. Yes. Okay, goes a little bit like this. Okay. And that's really as far as you need to take this step. So in the first stages of the painting, we're going to kind of simplify this into 3 different layers. A painting is always developed in layers. Okay, let's write that down. I'll write it right here. Layers, right? In fact, a good painting, an amazing painting, a painting that breathes and has life, it always tells a story of the history of how it was made. And we can see that in the accumulation of layers. So the first layers, we establish basic value relationships, okay? Here, right? We've gotten, this is our kind of the sketch that we did, and this basic value relationships, maybe just like 3 or 4 values. And that first layer needs to be a slightly thinner layer. That means that we're allowed rather to use a tiny little bit of your solvent in with the paint, so that layer is a little bit thinner. Now what that paint thinner does, what that solvent does, it helps it dry a little faster, right? Because the solvent will evaporate pretty quickly, and then that bottom kind of that bottom layer of just a little bit of paint will be able to cure a little bit faster. Okay, I'm going to use this brush still. I'm going to challenge myself with that. I would love for y'all to do the same. But I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to squint my eyes so I can get a really good sense of the actual value relationships that I'm working with. And then I'm going to start kind of assigning some values. Okay, so as I'm looking down, okay, at my paint, remember how I said it's harder psychologically to push things darker? It's easier, it seems less scary for us to push things lighter. For that reason, I'm going to say that in this very first layer, these lightest 2 colors are off limits. Okay, in this first layer, you are not allowed to use these top 2 colors. You're going to want to, but don't. Instead, we're going to go kind of embrace the dark side. What we're also going to do is do the background first. We always work from the background forward. So when I squint my eyes, in my brain I know that this background is black. It's a black surface. However, the painting is not at all about what I know and understand about the objects or things. It's about what I see. It's about the fall of light on a surface. And what I see is that the light coming in from this direction is actually hitting this plane, and it's a little bit lighter than this one. Here it's a little bit lighter than even the cast shadow down here. And this ground plane is actually getting a little bit more light. Okay? So let's see what I'm going to do. My paint is already mixed. I'm going to kind of do this. I know that it doesn't need to be pure black because there are parts of the box that are pure black. And if the background gets pure black, then the box, that even blacker box, is not going to show up. So I just used a tiny little bit of turpentine, not as much as I did to tone the surface, just a little bit to loosen it up. Okay, it's not even transparent, it's still opaque. And then I'm just going to assign this value. So one of the benefits of using this larger brush is that it covers a lot of area quickly, which is fine by me in this initial stage, right? Like, we're not getting details, we're just kind of getting a baseline understanding of the value pattern. Okay, so I'm paying a lot of attention to negative shape right now. All right, now I want you to keep in mind that getting the general value shapes, that does not mean that we're painting any object or area with a solid base coat. Okay, so we're not just automatically going to just paint the whole background this color. We're looking for the fall of light, right? So I noticed that, let's see, this background here is a little bit lighter. I mean, it's still dark overall, but it gets a little bit darker the farther to the right we get. So the cool thing about working from the background to the foreground is that it forces us to look at and record negative shape. And as y'all have learned, negative shape and drawing negative shape is one of the best ways to get an accurate drawing. Okay? All right. Pardon me if I sing to myself a little bit. Okay, so make sure that you're not kind of globbing the paint on at this point. It needs to go on smoothly and thin without being transparent. So it needs to be opaque but not thick, if that makes any sense. Okay, so it gets a little darker here. I actually see it down here at the bottom edge. It's a little bit darker, so I'll apply that. Okay, so always the background first, and then I'm going to put the ground plane. So notice I'm going to get a slightly new color. So I'm cleaning my brush. Okay, cleaning it in the solvent and the turpentine. Wiping it. Okay, so this is what my palette looks like right now. I started with this, okay, not the darkest dark, but close to it. And I added a little bit of the turpentine just to the bottom part of that pile of paint so that the rest of this is fresh. Remember, the turpentine or the mineral spirits, that dries the paint out fast. So I don't want to mix it with everything because then the whole pile of paint would dry. Okay, and then clean the brush and used this really dark. So now I need to work with the ground plane, right? Kind of around here. And that's a little bit lighter than that back plane. Okay, so it stands to reason if I'm going to get a little bit lighter. I'm not going to use that. I might not use this. I might actually make a new color. It's not quite that light. I think that's maybe, no, that's actually probably about right. I'll use that color. Okay, so same thing, since it's still that first layer, work the turpentine in just to the edge of that paint pile. Not so much that it's see-through, because you want to really, establish the values that you're seeing. There we go. I'm going to squint my eyes. Remember, you're not just blindly, automatically applying this color to everything, because remember, we've got this shadow shape here, right? So this stage of the process is a little bit like paint by number or color by number. Okay. So you're only really putting those general value shapes where they go. Okay. Focusing on overall light, overall dark, or somewhere in the middle. Don't blend anything. Really just work with a closed value system. Okay, so that's there. Also notice with the brush, I'm kind of handling it in a similar way as I did the palette knife, right? So the brush, this is a more of a bright shape, and it's kind of narrow here. So with this brush, I can make a broad mark like, this, but I can also make a linear mark like this. I can even move it like this, right? Or I can, just rotate it to get the shape, that I want. I can make a complex shape like this too, just with, that's one brush stroke, right? And so you'll kind of develop a sensitivity to that. But just be aware that you don't have to just use the brush like you would use a house painting brush, right? Up and down, up and down. The brush ultimately should feel like an extension of your body. Okay, it's a thing that allows you to sense, and I mean like truly, it's a sensory experience, sense the thickness of the paint, okay, the direction of the paint, the viscosity of the paint. Okay, so I have this little area here. Okay. And it gets a little bit darker. How dark does it get? It gets about as dark as this area. So this gets about as dark as that area. Okay. Using comparative relationships between values is a really great idea. So since I can use this brush in a whole bunch of different ways, a whole bunch of different shapes, all within this one shape and size, I can actually get a lot of variety. So one brush is never really just one set of, one type of brush stroke. It's a whole host of them. Okay, so background, ground plane, cast shadow. Okay, my angles are a little bit different here than what y'all are seeing. There's a little bit of parallax at play. I'll work on that in later videos. So now, it's time to kind of think about these objects, right? So let's see. What I'm going to give myself is a little bit more information. I'm going to use kind of that value pattern. It goes a little bit light here. Remember, we had that kind of shape of light here. Okay. I'm gonna, on this first layer, I'm still gonna use this, relatively big brush. Okay, this is gonna force me to stay general. Okay, so I'm gonna squint my eyes. Now, within this object and that object, I'm gonna start darker and then work my way to light. Remember, these top two values on the palette are still off limits, okay? So working from dark to light, and we always, in every painting, we save the lightest lights, the highlights, we save those for like the very last marks. Remember, we only understand weight through weightlessness. We only understand highlight or light through the darkness, okay? So we've got to build from the darkness and only add the lights last. All right, so let's see. The dark shadows, from what I see, I think y'all are going to see them a little bit darker. Actually, yeah, right here, this shadow is almost as dark as that background, right? So that within this area of shadow, I have a dark, dark, dark shadow, and I have a, a dark shadow. So I'm going to split those into two different colors. This shape of dark and this shape of dark. This one being even darker than this one. Okay, and I notice that the pattern is kind of it's like an accordion, right? It gets a band of dark, light, a band of dark, a band of light, a band of dark, a band of light, a band of dark, a band of light. Okay. So as I apply my dark colors, dark values, I'm going to keep that in mind. I'm going to put, these darks everywhere they go. So I'm not going to go full on, let's see, start over here. So I'm really trying to be deliberate with the shape of my brush and how I'm holding it. Just remember, you can press really hard or you can press really light. It's also important to remember that this first project, actually all of these projects, they're not as much about making a beautiful painting or beautiful product. It's about teaching you about the materials, teaching you about the decisions that you get to make, the decisions with how you hold a brush, deliberate decisions, and creating experiences for you to be able to learn about those materials, right? So all of this information that I'm telling you is not, I'm not telling you this information so that you can make pretty things or good paintings necessarily. I'm telling you so that you can experience these materials and this process in a meaningful way, and then take that experience and apply it to whatever you want to do, okay? None of this is really just about painting. So there's that little band there. It's not just about painting. It's about a whole host of things. Okay. I'm actually going to go ahead and this is all a bit darker down here. So I'm not blending. Okay, I'm not purposefully blending things. Remember that adjusting transitions comes a little bit later. Also, refining shape comes a little bit later too. At this stage, as long as you have the basic shapes, the basic proportions, dude, you're good. Our second layer of painted information is going to address shape, proportion, shape, more refined shapes, and more specificity with smaller value shapes too. Okay, there we go. And then there's just a cast shadow here. Okay, so before painting is anything, it's a bunch of blobs. Okay, so even though this area of the painting or this area of the object seems super light compared to how dark everything is, if we squint our eyes, you see that none of it is actually pure white. Absolutely none of it is pure white. For comparison, remember that white mug that used to be beside it? Okay, that is pure white. Okay? Or parts of this are pure white. Oh, there we go. You see how light that is? That's white. Kind of overlapping that with the light parts of the object. So I'm actually just going to use more of a middle tone, or that middle light tone on the palette. Okay, just so y'all can see. It's about right here. This is the lightest I'm going to get. Remember, these top two values, pure white, and the next darker, those are off limits for now. Okay. That is probably just going to be something you have to trust me on. It's not going to be what you want to do. You're going to want to add the lights. If you love details, if you love painting details or drawing details, or just love looking at details, then refraining from using the light values at this stage, that's going to be incredibly difficult for you. But I know that you can do it, right? So I'm not really worried about blending right now. I actually think I got too light on the left side here. Okay. If you find yourself like freaking out saying, this doesn't even look like what I'm looking at, you know, it just looks flat or it looks like blobs, then tell yourself just to wait for it, right? The creative process and visual perception, it's an adrenaline rush. Every single time I make a painting, every single time, from the first marks to the last marks, there's always a part of me that's saying, this isn't right, this couldn't be right, this looks so weird. But then I kind of think about, I don't think, I focus on what I am perceiving, what my eyes are actually seeing, what is the visual information in front of me. And I just follow that visual information, right? Trust my eyes more than my brain. Remember that the part of our brain that is skeptical, that is worried about something not turning out quote unquote right, that is actually the left side of your brain. Okay, that's the analytical part of your brain that does things in a linear way, that likes words, likes to know things for certain, is very rational, and that is not the part of the brain that we actually use at all, right? So if a little bit of self-doubt creeps into your process, that's a signal. That's the signal that your brain is a little bit in conflict, okay? That doubt is coming from a part of your brain that literally cannot solve this visual problem. So you tell the doubt, or the second guessing, tell that to get out of the way, and then fall back on the visual information, such as how dark is it, and compared to what? How tall, how round, how straight, okay? Because that's from your right brain, like literally the right side of your brain, right? I think y'all probably talked about that in foundations classes. Okay, but conflict is normal between left and right brain. It happens to me all the time. Okay, so I am going to adjust this plane of the box. Got a little bit wonky. I also think I made the base a little bit too light right there. So I'm going to just shave that off. shave this off. There we go. And slightly darken it. Just slightly. Okay, good. I did forget one little area here. Okay, at this stage in the painting, the entire surface of your canvas should be covered with something. Okay, with general information, it's not perfect, okay, but it has to be covered with something, okay? Now I'm gonna, I think from a distance, you know, our eyes kind of matrix this all together, but you see how blobby that is? Beautifully blobby, right? Okay, this is as far as you take it on the first layer. Okay, remember we're gonna refine overall shape and add more variation in values and some smaller value shapes a little bit later, okay? Here we go. So again, we've passed through this first stage and we have done this second stage, okay? The primary or the dominant elements, visual elements, are line first, then shape, and those together, considering their placement, it's proportion, and then value is our third element, and that's where we are now. Okay, transitions between values, so how soft or hard an edge is between two different values, we're going to consider that as like texture. So that's one of the very last things that we actually adjust. Okay, so hopefully this demo was helpful in starting your very first painting. Good luck. Let me know if you have any issues, and I'll see you later.